Chapter 14. To Duty's Drum. The end of winter came too fast. I had only just begun to see the spot in front of Arya's hearth as my own when we were summoned back to war. There were no tears, no dramatic parting. Arya knew Marcus for a soldier, and soldiers marched to war. Marcus offered his mate only one promise, that we would both return as soon as we had done our duty. It was a worthy ambition, to see the fighting over and to have a home to go back to. Neither of us had had such a hope before. The place by the fire would yet be mine again. "I was beginning to wonder if you would turn up," Segmund said as Marcus and I passed through the camp gates. "So doubtful you bothered to wait here for me?" The corner of Marcus's mouth twitched with amusement. "Or were you really waiting for one of your informants?" "If you are asking whether this is merely a happy coincidence, I'm afraid the answer is no. I promised General Silius I'd see you to him just as soon as you made it to camp." Segmund stepped to the side and directed us on with a wave of his hand. He was most put out that he had to wait at all. "The snows are barely melted. Is he so eager to be on the move?" Marcus asked. Segmund blew out his moustache in exasperation. "I told you it was a bad idea to take too much time away from camp. If you'd kept your eye on your proper business, then you would have known that preparations had been going on throughout the winter." Marcus made a dismissive gesture. "What have I got to do with building boats?" "Nothing as such," Segmund conceded, "but with everyone from mines to Xanta and chopping trees or tarring hulls, you'd think you'd know that you'd be needed." Marcus shrugged. "I'm here, aren't I?" Segmund gave my master an appraising look and rubbed his chin for comic effect. "Are you, though?" He winked. "I'm willing to bet your mind is still elsewhere. A warm bed and a certain farm, perhaps." My master's own eyes narrowed. "Why would it be your problem if it were?" "Oh, no problem, really." Segmund's whiskers split to show teeth. "I've only given the General my word that you're the chap he needs as a second when he takes the riders over the Rhine." "Riders?" Marcus's brow wrinkled and he stopped walking for an instant. "Why all the effort to get a fleet together if we're just going to conduct another hit-and-run raid?" "Precisely what we hope the Germans will ask themselves. It's a feint, of course," Segmund confided. "And you've generously made sure I get to face the German spears first?" Marcus grinned. Segmund smiled back. "What are friends for, after all?" They strode through the camp talking logistics and stratagems. I padded behind them, taking in the usual barrage of noises and smells. The scent of resins and tars was still strong both from within and outside the walls. Germanicus had replaced many of the ships he'd lost in his return journey over the Zuyder Zee last season, and added more to boot. I wasn't keen to get a closer acquaintance of any of the craft making their way upriver, but there was no doubting that we were better prepared to make a strike into the very heart of the enemy territory. As we made our way to the general's quarters, there was a clatter of hooves and a cavalry unit came into view. 2 officers rode at the head of the men. The first was instantly recognizable as Drustanus. The other was a less robust man. If Drustanus was the idolized Roman knight with his curled locks and square jaw, then the man next to him was something else entirely. His features were Germanic, but he was clean-shaven and his pale hair peeked out from beneath his helmet. The rumble that had begun in my throat at the sight of Drustanus died as I stared directly into his single eye and the livid scars that covered the other side of his face. Segmund looked up at the approaching horseman. "Flavus, brother to Arminius himself," Segmund said. "That bastard Drustanus is already trying to get in good, just in case he turns out to be the next commander of our forces over the Rhine. I've even heard some whispers that Drustanus has offered the colonel more than simple friendship." Marcus chose to ignore the last bit of gossip and instead focused on Flavus. "You think Flavus will be offered the command? There is his brother's history to consider after all." Segmund shrugged. "After what happened to Varus, the commanders will have to be cautious. But Flavus is solid enough by all accounts. From what I hear, his loyalty is without question." "I suppose it's a matter of being able to trust anyone," Marcus pondered aloud. "Either you have an outsider like Varus just waiting to be betrayed, or a man with split loyalties. Likely Augustus was right to give up at the Rhine." "A fair summation of the problem. We can win every battle, but Germania will be just as difficult to keep. A pointless war for questionable gain." "Good to see you're getting back into the spirit of the thing," Segmund laughed. Marcus gave the situation a moment more thought, then shrugged. "Rome doesn't need me to draw her borders. Such concerns are for the commanders." Segmund clapped him on the back. "So you say, but it's the legionary swords that will shape borders far more than any great men's ambitions. You say that, even though you admit we likely can't keep our gains?" Marcus looked hard at his friend, but the big man's humour never wavered. It would be nice if we could carve out a new province, but failing that, I think most of us would settle for Arminius' head on a pole, Segmund said. Marcus stared after the one-eyed rider. I wonder how he would feel about that. The warmer weather had lured General Silius into the open. When we found him, he was reviewing a unit of cavalry. "Ah, Atratinus," he said, barely taking his eyes from the riders. "It is good to see you here. I feared we would have to go without you." Marcus saluted. "Ive, General." "Ive yourself." The older man murmured something to the scribe next to him. "I assume Segmund has told you what we're about." "Only briefly, sir," Marcus said in the clipped tones he reserved for his superiors. "What would he need to know more than that, eh? It's not like he'll be risking his neck with the rest of us." The general stared hard at Segmund. The subject of his examination only grinned more broadly. "Much as I would love to share the glory, other logistical duties require my attention. There are many ways to win a war," he added. "Logistical duties, is it?" The general imitated his spy master. His brow creased and he gave Segmund a shrewd look. "It wouldn't have anything to do with Tiberius sending 2,000 Praetorians up here, would it? I wonder if you'll be as good at spying on your own." Segmund smiled. "The general is forgetting that my mother was German." "Not for an instant. Just betting that military men sworn to the emperor will be tighter-lipped than the average German peasant," Silius shot back. "A challenge, to be sure," Segmund admitted. "It is certainly without precedent that the Praetorians should take the field without the emperor." "Perhaps they're just getting some practice in," Silius replied. "I hope there was no ambiguity there, General. Caesar has been clear on his position," Segmund said. "Would that we were also clear. I'll bet there's more than one Praetorian who would ride with Sejanus as happily as Tiberius." Silius's good humour couldn't hide the bitterness at that last part. Segmund shrugged. He is their prefect, after all. Silius threw up his hands. 2 years and already his eyes turned beyond his station. The general wheeled on Marcus. "I can see you are bored by all this. Good. It's not worthy of a proper soldier's time. Let Segmund and his ilk play their games. We have better things to do." Marcus nodded. "You still have not told me what task you would like me to achieve, sir." Silius took a breath. "Caesar wants to hit the chatty hard. Give him something to think about while we maneuver. To that end, I'm leading a cavalry assault. We need to be quick and effective." Silius met Marcus's eye. "Your name sprung to mind." "I'm honoured, sir." "Don't need you to be honoured. I need your best." The general indicated the nearby cavalry. "These men are yours. More than you're used to commanding, I know, but you'll have to become accustomed to it. I need officers with good sense to lead my men." He paused. "Well?" "As ever I stand ready, sir," Marcus replied. "And him?" Silius reached down and petted me. He had no chicken to offer this time, but the fondness he felt for me was clear. "I intend to move fast. Will he be able to keep up?" "I doubt that should present much difficulty," Marcus replied. "My own worry is that it is yet early in the season. There may be impediments to us moving as fast as you would like." The general withdrew his hand from my head. "There we will have to trust to luck. Our action is strategic, but there's no knowing if the gods will favour it." The rain hammered down hard enough that it was a wonder the trees above us kept their leaves. The horses were forced to move slowly on the muddy trail that was fast becoming a stream. Before we left, the general speculated on whether the gods would be with us. Marcus looked up and water poured down his face. "I believe we have our answer." Caius, his second in command, looked at the men behind us. "We'll have to make camp soon. And as usual, it's up to us to find somewhere we won't be washed away," Marcus said. "I'll take a few men and run ahead, see if I can find anything." The orders were given, and I soon found myself having to increase my speed to keep up with Marcus and 4 other horsemen. It was no great strain, since the conditions meant they couldn't move at anything much above a canter. Even at that speed, we soon outdistanced the main column. Marcus started a sweep of the land ahead of the strike force, looking for higher ground and any kind of shelter. Before too long, a glimpse of smoke rising above the trees informed us that the tribesmen had had the same idea. At Marcus's order, the men dismounted, and 3 of them slunk forward while the other 2 stayed with the horses. As we advanced, the thick foliage thinned. The stumps and axe marks on the felled trees made it clear that it was no temporary settlement ahead. We stayed low and crept closer to the stronghold, a few buildings behind a wooden stockade. Marcus motioned for the men to head back to the horses. The heavy rain hid us from the guards posted at the gates, and we slipped back to find the rest of the pack. "You were right. It's worth a try," Silius said. The men blinked water from their eyes as they stared up at the fort on the hill above. "The only problem is that we have neither the time nor equipment for a siege. We take it in a charge, you will have a hard time of it. Silius pulled his cloak tight. Not that we've got anywhere else to be in this deluge. Sir, if I may, Marcus said, I think it might be possible to take a small force and hold the gate open for the charge. The general grinned broadly. That's what I was hoping you'd say, Atratinus. We all know someone has to do it, but you beat Sparsus here to the punch, so you get the glory. Atratinus has more experience of such things, the other officer said. You see that, Marcus? Silius laughed softly. Equestrian double talk. The man implies he's better than you because he has no experience of the dirty side of war. All trumpets and charges, eh, Sparsus? Sir, I protest. I was only saying that Marcus Atratinus is known to be one of our most proficient hunters. Sparsus squirmed slightly, which only added to the general's enjoyment. Or perhaps implying he's only good for slitting other men's throats, the general said. The corner of his lip quivered as he watched his subordinate's discomfort with obvious amusement. Neither Sparsus nor Marcus spoke. Silius snorted. Look at the two of you. One of you looks as if he'd swallowed a bad oyster, and the other one's doing his best impression of a stone wall. I might just start talking to the dog to get some intelligent conversation. Silius looked down at me. I turned away quickly. It didn't do to meet an Elfa's eye. You too? He asked me. The general returned his attention to the men next to him, and his tone was all business. None of this gets us any closer to taking that fort, though. Atratinus, choose the men you think best suited to getting up that hill unseen. My advice is to avoid any of Sparsus's bandy-legged breed. Sparsus, you take anyone that Atratinus isn't taking with him, and get them ready to ride as soon as I give the order. I want a roof over my head tonight. Both men saluted and returned to their men. Marcus wasted no time choosing 8 soldiers to go up the hill with him. The men stripped off the plated armor they wore, along with any mail or anything that might flash or make a noise. Marcus was quick to point out to anyone who complained the risk they took would be a hollow one if they were spotted before they could strike. Gnaeus, Manius, and Aulus followed Marcus up one side of the hill, while Caius led the rest of the men up the other. The clinging mud and heavy rain made the exercise uncomfortable, but it also meant that the men at the fort's gates didn't see us until the last moment. Marcus sliced his man's throat open like a new-downed deer. Then his men helped him up over the wall. Caius was only seconds behind. They had the main gate halfway open before a cry went up from within the camp. Tribesmen, armed with their long spears, poured from the buildings behind the palisade. Manius staggered back as a thrown spear pierced his belly. The point stuck out from the back of his leather breastplate. Dark gore streamed out, staining the puddles at his feet. The soldier stood for an instant, too shocked to know he was finished. A second spear appeared in his chest, and Manius was down. The Germans let out their battle cries, and the 8 men braced themselves to face more than 10 times their number. Marcus did not need to signal me to hang back in the face of that bristling charge. The memory of the spear on my shoulder rose unbidden, and the shrieking from the darkness in my head threatened to overwhelm me. I fought not to lose my bladder, and my legs shook at the sound of the German cries. Marcus snatched up a shield from one of the fallen gods just in time to meet the rush of the first tribesman. Aulus ran in with another stolen shield to stand with him. The hardened hides slapped together, and the wood beneath creaked as Romans and Germans shoved against each other. The blades flicked out, trying to find flesh behind the straining barrier. We began to give ground before the superior numbers almost instantly, but by now the trumpets had sounded from further down the hill, and the thunder of hooves was building behind us. Caius fell back, his thigh laid open almost to the bone. Gnaeus stumbled in the mud, and an axe hammered into his skull. Marcus fought 3 enemies at once, and his shield was all but ruined by the heavy blows it absorbed. The sight of my master in such danger was enough to override the fear that had gripped me. I leapt forward, but not silently as I had been trained. A kind of madness suffused me. The only way I knew to force down the instincts telling me to run was to give in to the wildness. It was the same panic I had felt when I faced Ajax, an uncompromising determination to survive. The man on Marcus's left went down under my weight. I didn't stay long enough to finish him. I could already feel the spears darting at me from the dark, like the raven beaks of the things that flapped in the darkness of my lost eye. The spears that missed me as I jumped aside pierced my victim, and there was a scream. I broke forward, going for the groin of the next man. Marcus called out behind me, "Hold!" His voice was hoarse. The steel clanged. Once, twice, I bit and rolled, taking a chunk of meat as I avoided more thrusts. The thunder was all around us now, and the ululations of the tribesmen turned to screams of despair as Sparsus and his men poured in through the open gate. Those who were not swept up in the initial charge were hounded back to their long, low buildings. General Silius had his roof by the time night fell. That brief skirmish was the only noteworthy part of the general's initial raid. The rains made it impossible to go much deeper into enemy territory, but there was a pleasant upshot to the whole affair. When we finally broke down the door of the last building where the fighting was fiercest, we discovered that we had inadvertently captured many members of the new chatty king's household, including his wife and child. Arpus would no doubt do much of our work for us by complaining to his new subjects about the losses he'd sustained from our attack. For the flying column, it was back to camp and a march to join the rest of the invasion forces at the embarkation point further down the river Utrecht. I balked to see the ships again and recoiled from the stench of 80,000 men pressed so close together. Our route took us through Drusus's foss. The canal, named for Caesar's father, was a brief moment of calm before we entered the choppier waters of the Zuyder Zee. I found them no more to my liking than the last time we had travelled this way, and the men who had returned with Caesar the last season told stories of how comrades' ships had floundered in the turbulent waters. There were few who were not green by the time we reached the Eames. Once the fleet had come to rest, we crossed to the northern side of the river and began to set up camp in the territory of the Angriari. No sooner was the process begun than we had news that the Angriari would not be honouring their pacts with us. Caesar sent General Stetinus along with Flavius to punish them for their betrayal. The camp soon buzzed with the story that Arminius himself had met his brother, shouting his defiance for Rome from the safety of the opposite riverbank. Marcus and his fellows took the enemy general's presence as a good sign. Daunting as the German leader's reputation might be, his presence meant that the pieces for a decisive battle might finally have fallen into place. Marcus agreed, but he didn't entirely share those hawkish sentiments. Most who spoke on the matter thought only of glory and triumph, revenge for the shame of the past. But when Marcus spoke of winning the war, the longing for Arria's farm was clear in his eyes, an echo of my own eagerness to return home.